Views expressed in the following program are those of the individual authors and participants and do not necessarily reflect those of Troy University, the United States Air Force, the Air Command and Staff College, or the Department of Defense.
First off, thank you so much, Bill and Robin, for joining us. And I will start by asking Bill, can you provide a history of U.S. intelligence?
Yeah, today we're going to try to talk a little bit about general aspects of intelligence, and I'm a historian, so the best place to always start is history. The United States, Republic of the United States, was born out of an intelligence success. George Washington was the first spy master and was very successful in using military deception and intelligence operations against the British. For many years, the United States did not have bureaucratic intelligence. It would gin up an intelligence organization during war, and then it would get rid of it during peace. The modern intelligence system comes about as a result of a catastrophic surprise attack. The CIA was created out of the attack at Pearl Harbor. People like Wild Bill Donovan had been working with British intelligence services for a while. He knew we needed a bureaucratic intelligence, and so he responded with the creation of the CIA. Since World War II, our bureaucratic intelligence apparatus has grown and grown. First the CIA, then the NSA, which does signals intelligence, and then the Defense Intelligence Agency. And we have over a dozen of intelligence agencies today, which creates great promise, but also shows a great amount of difficulty. There's always been suspicion in the United States of intelligence, worried that it conflicts with democracy, and to this day, that's one of the central themes of American intelligence. Can a democracy have effective intelligence service?
Great. Robin, I'd like to ask you, as an ally of the United States, Britain has a very important intelligence history as well. Would you mind sharing with us the history of British intelligence?
Well, we have a long history, so I don't want to take up all the time of the show. So I'll give you a potted history. And also, I'm not a historian like Dr. Bill, so I'm a military person, so I'll skew it that way. But we've had a long history of intelligence, really coming from the Elizabethan area of Walsingham, who was an amazing spy master, who worked against the Spanish Armada. But largely very similar to the US, our intelligence agencies have been born from conflict and have, apart from the state apparatus, have largely fallen along the naval and army lines. Obviously the Air Force intelligence came later. But largely, currently, our intelligence agencies are split into the military and civilian kind of empires of intelligence. And we have the government intelligence agencies, like the Secret Intelligence Service, or MI6, to everybody who that's how it knows, it's James Bond. And we also have the Security Service, which is domestic intelligence services, which is otherwise known as MI5. And then we have supporting agencies, I can't forget GCHQ either, which obviously had a very important role in the Second World War and still does today. And then we have the military organizations and intelligence that follows along the lines of the Navy, the Army, and the Air Force. So very similar to what the US has today.
Perfect. I would like to follow up and Bill, actually ask you a little bit about the vocabulary dealing with intelligence, because it's something that most Americans really don't understand, and there's a lot of confusion. Can you provide us some overview of vocabulary within the intelligence community?
With the technological changes and organizational changes, we've been able to expand the use of intelligence, and it's led to an increase of what we call INTs, or forms of intelligence. The oldest form, which is my interest, is human intelligence. You have signals intelligence. You have electric intelligence. You have MASINT, measures and signatures intelligence. We have Robin's specialty, open source intelligence, called OSINT. you find the key points of intelligence is to find out what the enemy is doing, and at the same time protect your own secrets. And so one of the things you have is called counterintelligence, which is protecting your secrets and seeing how the enemy operates against your own people. We have redeveloped in the 21st century something called fusion intelligence, where you put all the different types of intelligence and the multiple intelligence agencies, civilian and military, in one room, and look at the different pieces of the puzzle. And then they use direct action SOF or other forces to go gather more intelligence. So, for example, in killing Zarqawi, it was captured by British paratroopers who brought in the hard drives, and we were able to use the hard drives, analysis of the hard drives, to then send direct action forces to capture Zarqawi. Unfortunately, they couldn't get to him in time, and he got bombed, and dead men tell no tales.
Now, Bill was talking about open source intelligence being your specialty, and so I'd like to turn to that. I remember many years ago, the director of the CIA was in front of Congress testifying in an open session, and he was asked what one of the best sources of intelligence was, and he said, actually, Facebook. We love to look at Facebook because we don't have to expend a lot of resources. People tell us what they're doing. Could you give us a background of open source intelligence and talk about some of the problems with open source intelligence as well as some of the benefits of it?
Of course. So open source intelligence has always been around. This is not a new phenomena, although this is something that we have talked about a lot, seemingly more recently. Certainly during the Second World War, you had organizations like, from the British side, BBC Monitoring, that would monitor foreign radio signals. And you had the American equivalent, which was FBIS, which later got subsumed into the CIA after the Second World War. I think why open source intelligence has become so important today, or has been given a new lease of life, is largely because of the technological advancements and really the democratization of intelligence, in that everyone is now an intelligence source through our use of social media or technology in some way, shape or form. And for intelligence agencies, this is an absolute goldmine. The problem is, in many ways, is that there's too much gold. There's just too much information out there. And that information, and also the ability to verify that information, is becoming incredibly difficult because of disinformation and even misinformation. You can find diamonds in there, absolutely, but you have to look really hard. And I think this is one of the biggest challenges of open source today, which is it's certainly, I think, in many ways, and organizations like Bellingcat and Forensic Architecture are challenging traditional state-level intelligence agencies in terms of the accuracy and the depth of analysis they can currently do, but how much work that takes and how they verify that information is man-intensive. It's something that you still need that human in the loop to be able to do. Does that get to you?
Yes, absolutely.
One of the common tensions, particularly in American intelligence, is what is the role of humans and what is the role of technology. So after the Vietnam War, with the Church Commission, where a lot of dirty secrets, the crown jewels of the CIA, were revealed, the intelligence agencies turned against classic spying, against human intelligence, against paramilitary operations, dirty tricks, things like that, and they began to rely on technologies, what I call the Stansfield-Turner disease. Stansfield-Turner became DCI, Director of Central Intelligence Agency, in the 70s, and began to purge our ability to do human intelligence and relied on signals intelligence, satellites, and things like that. And it came back a little bit in the 80s under Reagan, and it damn near fell completely apart in the 1990s. And between that and the competition between different bureaucracies, we were left blind, and one of the reasons you had 911 was a competition between these things and the failure of human intelligence. Our human intelligence capacity on 911 was very diminished. Very few Arabic speakers, people being trained for Directorate of Operations was very few, and so we went into the global war on terror with very weak capability to do human intelligence. while that happened, we redeveloped that capability. We strengthened paramilitary operations. The first people in Afghanistan are not military, but are intelligence officers. And now today, the big debate is, how much do we focus on strategic intelligence and how much do we focus on paramilitary operations? It is a central debate inside the intelligence agencies.
Actually, I would like to now turn to Robin and ask you about the special relationship, because the U.S. really enjoys a relationship with the UK that's unlike its relationship with any other country, and that's developed into what we call the Five Eyes Network. Can you talk about that, and really, what is the origin of the special relationship between the U.S. and Great Britain?
I think I'll answer that one first, which is I think it was the Second World War. And the necessity, the urgency of being able to work together to defeat this significant enemy that we had. And then after that, through to the Cold War. For me, most of my career, I have worked with the Five Eyes nations directly. In my last 2 tours, I've worked for a 2-star and a 3-star American general. So we have worked very closely. I have worked very closely together. In fact, a quick dip, when I was in Afghanistan, I was one of the British strategic analysts for General McChrystal. And at that time, he wanted that relationship to be so close that he argued and got me completely no-formed. So I was privileged to see the panicked face of the CIA agent who would give me their briefcase to take back to my general. That's because General McChrystal thought it was so important to be able to see what everyone else was seeing from his point of view. And it's unique and it's unusual, and it's something that I think we, the British, completely and utterly respect. It's something that we honour, and it's something that we would never want to ruin. And I like to think also from the American point of view and from the other Five Eyes nations that they also see that relationship as special and productive, because at the end of the day, it's all about decision advantage. And if we can provide within that community of nations that decision advantage to our political masters, then it should continue for as long as possible.
One of the challenges with that is changing relationships between nations. Before 9/11, we saw French intelligence, the DGSE, the swimming pool, la piscine, as one of our biggest competitors. They were in Silicon Valley doing a lot of espionage. It upset us a great deal. 9/11 happens, and all of a sudden, we redeveloped this relationship with French intelligence, and you find them in the Tactical Operations Center a few months after 9/11. So when you do paramilitary operations and you train troops to fight the enemy, your friend today can be your enemy tomorrow. Who created the Viet Minh? The United States, the OSS. Who created Al-Qaeda? The United States. The CIA worked very closely with Osama bin Laden and helped create that organization, and we created a monster out of our paramilitary unconventional warfare operations in Afghanistan. So what we're dealing with today, in some ways, we created ourselves.
Bill, I'd like to turn to a quick question about when do you release information? So when you talk about human, you mean people on the ground, you mean human intelligence running agents. And so one of the difficulties with sharing intelligence is that you may burn some of your assets. So how do you weigh when to share intelligence and when it's better to keep the intelligence and let events occur, even if you're aware of something
It has to
happening?
do with information warfare. Sometimes your intelligence is revealed by sources you don't like in the Vietnam War with the New York Times or the Washington Post revealing stuff that you don't want. And so one of the ways you reveal stuff is to get on top of that. In intelligence agencies, particularly the CIA, most victories are unknown. We'll have multiple intelligence victories, and it's not to 20, 30, 40 years later that we can reveal those things. Mostly it's defeats that come to be known. When CIA was running operations in Nicaragua in the 80s and one of the operatives' planes crashed, the Nicaraguans got a treasure trove intelligence doctrine, and the next thing you know, you have the President of the United States almost on the docket in the Iran-Contra thing because somebody got hold of the wrong information. part of your job in intelligence is to guard secrets and be very careful who you let see the secrets. The president has not always been shown secrets. For example, in 1945, we rolled up the entire KGB apparatus in the United States by the FBI, and President Truman was not told.
And why was that?
They didn't trust him. They thought he was a rube. They had worked for FDR. They thought that Truman was over his head. So arrogance, and not a full democratic understanding of how intelligence should work in a republic.
I have a question for both of you. And the question is this: as we look back over the last few decades, we generally know about intelligence from the errors that we make. We never hear about the successes. And so the question I want to ask is, what are the lessons we learned, and how has intelligence had to change to compensate for some of the mistakes we've made in the past over the last couple decades?
I can take that one first. I think a lot of it is about secrecy. You look at how the intelligence agencies from the Second World War go into the Cold War, and a lot of it is about segregation, their own separate streams. Bill talked about the different ins. But as we saw with 9/11, you can't keep to your own lane. You have to share information. And yes, the sources are precious. And yes, we have to protect them. But also, knowledge is also precious. And if you don't share that knowledge, then how can you have, like I said before, this kind of decision advantage? And one of the areas where I think we're starting to see more movement is in the fact of the value of open source intelligence that is out there. And I think what we're seeing, the quality of analysis that comes from some of these so-called public intelligence agencies, is actually putting pressure on the traditional state agencies to release more information, because the information is out there and the analysis is so good. But it's sharing, it's secrecy. We've got to get our head around how we need to appropriately protect this information, but at the same time share it and also disseminate it, bearing in mind the intelligence gain loss, which Bill alluded to earlier.
The issue is also we have to work more with private industries as we have these rapid technological advances, as we have the introduction of AI. It's getting more and more complicated. As Robin has talked about, we're flooded with information. Data has now replaced oil. Data is the most important thing you can have out there, but how many people can we share? Who do we share data with? If we want to work on a clandestine project with Silicon Valley, how can we? Because the cultures could not be opposite. Think of the difference between, say, CIA culture and Microsoft or Google or anything like that. They're very different cultures. They don't wear open-toed sandals in Langley. They just don't. They don't wear hemp shirts. You know, it's a very, how can you trust them? The rules to get in intelligence agencies are so strict that hardly anybody at Google could ever get a security clearance. But how do you work with people who could never get a security clearance, develop the most top secret technology for you to deal with all these changes? Intelligence organizations are having a very hard time dealing with social change. We were talking earlier, in the Vietnam War, they would not let anybody in CIA who had smoked marijuana. What reached a point that there was a very tiny sliver of society that they could bring in, and they needed more people. And so they lifted the rule, for example, on smoking marijuana.
I think just to grab on that, I think, yes, it's secrecy, but also, to get to Bill's point, it's diversity in analysis. If you have an organization, a state agency, where everyone, I wouldn't say looks the same, but feels the same in terms of their background and their knowledge and their experience, then largely you're going to get an analysis that looks roughly the same. What I think state-level organizations, agencies have struggled with is getting that diversity into the from the analysis point of view, so that they can start thinking about different things. That's something that we have to work on. It's difficult though, because you tend to recruit from a certain portion of society. It's how do they diversify to get better and more quality depth of analysis.
To build on his point, the first 5 DCIs at CI came from Phillips Andover High School. They came from the same high school. They were recruited in high school. They went to Yale. They studied under a particular professor. They had some combat experience in the Marines and then went to the agency. It was very inbred. Now, it's not that way today. Gina Haspel is from a simple background in Kentucky and worked her way until she eventually became Director of Central Intelligence. But but there's a lot of groupthink in the organization. There are serious problems of mirror imaging. I would say we have the greatest crisis in the last 20 years, once we got over the paramilitary human problem, of intelligence analysis. Intelligence analysis is very difficult. At CI you have one branch called the Directorate of Intelligence, and all they do is analysis. At CI you have a conflict between Directorate of Intelligence guys that are called the nerds, and then you have the cowboys of the Directorate of Operations, like the guys that went into Afghanistan in 2001 and helped set up that whole scenario.
Great. I would like to, in the little time that we have left, I would like to ask both of you, if you would, to give me your opinion about what are the greatest challenges facing intelligence gathering, intelligence sharing, etc. You've mentioned several of them already, but what are the greatest challenges that states are faced with in terms of intelligence?
I mean, from my point of view, it's about acting at the speed of relevance. I mean, I've talked multiple times about being for decision advantage, but because of, as Dr. Bill's already said, this glut of information that's currently out there, you know, it's not just social media, but the ability to go online and search so much, even like just private data from companies gathering, is that how do we access all that information? How do we analyze all that information? How do we verify that information at a pace that is relevant for any kind of operation or for decision advantage? That for me is really difficult. And the conversation then naturally turns to, oh, artificial intelligence will solve all this problem. And yes, it's going to help. It's going to help us sort out some of the nuggets from the noise. But you still need people to be able to, at some point of choke point, to go, that's valuable, that's not valuable. And we're not there yet. AI is not good enough to be able to sort this out fully, that we can rely on it totally. I'm not saying that won't be coming. I'm not saying that agencies aren't already looking at that. But certainly for me, it's just the sheer depth and breadth of the information currently out there and how we make it work at the speed of relevance.
The biggest thing for me is to balance Directorate of Operations materials, the cowboy operations, and to balance analysis. Our biggest failures in the 21st century have come from failures of analysis. Look at them. After 2008, invasion of Georgia by Russia, a failure of analysis. 2004, and always at the Olympics. 2014, you have an attack on Ukraine and Crimea, again, failure of analysis. October 7th, in the attack in Israel, you not only have the failure of Mossad, but you have American and Western intelligence agencies not seeing that. And failure of analysis has serious consequences, and your guys in Directorate of Operations can't always fix it. You have to have a balance and approach. Right now we're trying to forget everything that happened the last 20 years, and that's an enormous mistake. You can see it in education, where we're purging any lessons from irregular war. What things can we take, for example, fighting in the Battle of Mosul in Syria, and apply to Ukraine? Embracing some of the lessons learned from Ukraine. Some services are embracing those lessons, other services are ignoring them. Too much focus on China. Yes, China is an important and irritating rival, but I can tell you the analysis on China between the intelligence agencies and the military is very different, and they need to come together on the same page. And of course, militaries are driven by acquisitions. They want money for new airplanes or new ships or whatever, and so they're going to overemphasize one threat over another. So we also have to do a better job of oversight. Oversight of intelligence operations, despite the brief moment of the Church Committee, has not been good. There's been a lot of mistakes made, and most senators or congressmen don't care much about their service on oversight committees.
Excellent. We have really just a few minutes remaining, and for this I'd like to just touch on the role of technology and intelligence and ask, how has it really changed? Because I think for me, as I look at it just as an outsider, that has changed both the human and also with the open source. It's made it much more complicated. I think there's so much more information to dive through. what has been the effect of technology on intelligence?
I think, I mean, from my own point of view in terms of open source, it's lowered the barrier of entry. We talk about bedroom analysts, you know, people just at home doing their own intelligence analysis. But really, there is this availability now of technology that has allowed them to do some sophisticated analysis at a very high quality level. And also, you are starting to see organizations utilize, for example, private satellite companies. And effectively, what you are starting to see is that normal citizens or public organizations are starting to have state-like capabilities when they can actually order up satellite imagery at a relatively cheap price that is 24/7 fully observable of the Earth. That is a hell of a capability to put towards your own analysis. And also just the online communities that spring up, the diversity of network analysis, that they can bring in people from all over academia, their friends, their colleagues, not just from the country that they are in, but across the world at any time. Bellingcat, when they were doing some very sophisticated facial recognition analysis, could reach out to academia in the States, and someone would turn around and go, yes, I would like to do that, and they get their answer. In many ways, the technology has had the freedom for people to be able to do this on their own. And that is at once a very exciting, thrilling thing, but also has a lot of dangers and challenges associated with it. Because at what point does the individual wearing a suit have a greater capability than an individual wearing a military uniform? And are we at that point, at tipping point at the moment? Probably not, but will it tip in the future? That for me is the danger of technology, but also the opportunity that it offers.
Again, back to earlier point, it makes it hard to decide what is victory. What is your theory of victory? And now technology can lead to a greater probability of war. So is launching a cyber attack against an opponent's nuclear facility, is that an act of war? If you use a cyber attack to destroy infrastructure that causes the loss of life and limb, is that an act of war? Cyber warfare and intelligence are tied very closely at the hip, and yet our policymakers are behind the curve. John McCain couldn't use a computer at all. He made me look like Bill Gates, and I'm very weak. I mean, you have most of our policymakers know very little about technology. None of them have had intelligence experience. So how are they going to make policy? Who is going to help them make policy? We still haven't worked out what is an act of war. With this new technology, with traditional intelligence gathering techniques, what is victory? What is defeat? We still don't have those things worked out in our mind. We've lived in a strategic fog since 1990, and we have not walked out of the fog.
Well, we are done. This wraps up the show. And thank you both, Bill and Robin, for your time with us. It's been a great pleasure. And I hope to bring you back.
Yes.
So.
Thank you for your insights.
Thank you.
Thank you.